A lot of franchises and series have a villain. They have a main antagonist. Often or not, the villain or antagonist is an interesting aspect of the series that many people talk about, whether it be the villain's actions, the villain's motivations for said actions, a redemption arc if they even have one, or the opposite where they progressively get worse, or just any extra aspects like voice and character design. Villains are a fun concept and are really interesting to look into. With Five Nights at Freddy's being a horror franchise, having a villain would make a lot of sense, and it does. William Afton is a fan favorite character from the FNAF series. A lot of people like his character, so much so that even people make fan-made interpretations of the character. How he's portrayed in official FNAF media and fan-made FNAF media are both interesting to a lot of people and fans. And today we're going to be looking at as many variations, interpretations, and portrayals there are of the villain and see what they have in store. This is going to be quite the deep dive. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe down below and turn on the notification bell. Totally optional, will be appreciated if you did. Without further ado, let's look into the various versions there are of the man who always comes back. This is the most obvious and definitive one to start off with. The original, the first, the official, and by far the most popular. William Afton in the FNAF games is a very interesting character, mostly because of how varied his appearances are throughout the series. To start off with the beginning of the series, FNAF 1, nothing is basically known about him. His name, what he looks like, his motivations, his backstory, literally nothing. In FNAF 1, there is simply just a killer who so happened to lure 5 kids back into a room and murder them. These 5 kids would go on to possess the 5 main animatronics of the game: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy. Nothing was known on who it was that committed the murders. There were even theories back in the old days where it was just FNAF 1 and everyone pointed to Mike Schmidt as the culprit, popularized by MatPat from Game Theory. Of course now, we know it ain't Mike Schmidt, that literally being the killer's oldest son under a fake name, but the mystery was on back in the day. This mystery on the killer's identity served the purpose of providing mysterious intrigue to the lore of FNAF 1 that was told subtly. It wasn't until FNAF 2 where we got a little bit more information on the identity of the killer. In FNAF 2, after dying, you would have a rare chance of getting a minigame out of 4 total minigames. Most of these minigames would portray a purple man. In the Give Cake to the Children minigame, we would actively see this purple man pull up to an establishment and kill a child that was outside it and then drive off. We would find out that this child was Charlie Emily, the daughter of Henry Emily, one of the founders of Fazbear Entertainment, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point was that this minigame basically cemented that this purple figure was our killer. Now, of course, there was a theory on there being 2 killers, a purple guy and a pink guy, because of the sprites throughout the minigames being different from each other. However, this was of course debunked. In the Save Them minigame, there was of course how Afton was holding something in his hand. What he was holding is something that was theorized back then. Suspects were a phone, which would be used as evidence for a debunked theory I'll touch on a little bit, a wrench, some even thought it was his own hand. Yeah. It's also implied in the Save Them minigame that he also killed 5 other children at the FNAF 2 location, possessing the toy animatronics respectively. Even though we get a little bit more information on Afton in this game, we still don't know a lot about him, and he still remains a mystery. The fact he's a purple figure made the mystery much more chilling too. Who this man was still up for theorizing back then. And then we carry on to FNAF 3, where we probably have one of his most memorable appearances in the franchise to date, that being SpringTrap. SpringTrap is typically regarded as one of, if not the best character to come from the series, and that's the fact that he's the killer himself, and that the gameplay of FNAF 3 is pretty much a whole boss fight against him, the big bad of the franchise up until this point. In FNAF 3, SpringTrap is seen as a genuine threat because he comes across as a man hunting for you, which was pretty much the case. His character design was also pretty detailed and looked extremely terrifying for fans. We also even got to see how he ended up like this. In FNAF 3 for the Night 5 minigame, we see where Afton's story ended, for now at least. He gets overly cocky and thinking that getting inside the Spring Bonnie suit would help get the children's spirits off his back, but of course, he dies in that suit from getting spring locked, basically serving as a somewhat ironic end to the villain. Him dying inside the very suit he used to murder his young victims, as well as being the cause for his own death, as in the spring locks in the suit. Of course, this results in him possessing SpringTrap, which has basically given him all new life in the suit, which is something that will be relevant to discussion later. It's pretty damn great in all honesty. And of course, when Fazbear's Fright burns down at the end of FNAF 3, we of course see that SpringTrap survives the fire. It is also further confirmed by the 1020 mode ending cutscene from Sister Location. Of course, this was a play on the sort of cliche for horror media that the villain pretty much is still alive and or undead and will basically come back. SpringTrap is so iconic and is pretty much what people typically think of when they hear William Afton. To me, this is his ideal variation in the official FNAF series. As well as FNAF 3, there was a popular theory around this time that phone Phone Guy and Afton, who was dubbed Purple Guy at this point in the series, were the same person. Evidence included Afton possibly holding a phone in the FNAF 2 Save Them minigame like I mentioned earlier, Afton looking at Foxy leave Pirates Cove in the FNAF 2 Foxy Go 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 minigame with a smile, possibly being tied to Foxy being Phone Guy's favorite character, and how Phone Guy not liking the puppet, possibly being tied to how the puppet / Charlie was Afton's first victim. This was enough evidence at the time for people. However, this was of course debunked later on, as Sister Location was the debut of Afton having a voice and him sounding nothing like Phone Guy. Literally a different accent too, Afton sounding more British and Phone Guy sounding American. It of course is definitely debunked by now, as in 2024. There was the release of an interactive FNAF book titled The Week Before, which centered around Phone Guy and what he was doing the week before the events of FNAF 1. In this book, Phone Guy is given a name, that being Ralph. He also has a daughter named Kapila. He is also given his own motivations for what he says in his phone calls that are heard in FNAF 1. Completely different name and family from what we know of Afton as of current day. Obviously disproving the already long debunked theory that Afton and Phone Guy are one and the same. Despite being debunked, it was still an interesting theory that was getting people to solve the identity of the series at the time, Nameless being antagonist and villain. Now, around FNAF 4 is where I say that we find out a bit more in regards to William, mostly in who his family is. We have two sons of his introduced in this game, Michael Afton and the Crying Child. Michael being the oldest and the Crying Child being the youngest. We obviously get to learn and see the dynamic between the two brothers, which ends up resulting in the Bite of 83, one of the most important events in the FNAF timeline. In terms of William himself, we can kind of gather he's not there for his sons a lot of the time, and he's busy at the establishments he's located at. The only time we truly get to see Afton in FNAF 4 with our own eyes is when he's seemingly helping someone who's most likely an employee get in a spring lock suit. Another part about FNAF 4 in regards to Afton is actually something that comes from a newer piece of FNAF media, that being the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, which a lot of fans consider canon to the games. In the Undeniably story, which is the third story of the 8th book, P7, we find out that Afton pre-records messages for his human experiments. This of course has led people to theorize that second friend Fredbear himself, aka the Fredbear plushie, who talks to the Crying Child throughout FNAF 4's minigames, is actually pre-recorded messages of William speaking. We also learn in this story that, yeah, Afton experiments something called hallucinogenic gas on humans, which basically kind of reveals what is going on with the nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4. This story reveals a lot more about what Afton is doing around the time of FNAF 4, which is pretty interesting and was very intriguing for fans to look into, especially since Didophobia is pretty much one of, if not the only stories from Tales of the Pizzaplex books that isn't focused on any of the Steelwolf games, but Scott's games. A little bit after FNAF 4 was the release of the first ever FNAF book, The Silver Ice, which that version of Afton will be discussed separately in his own section from the official FNAF games version of Afton. However, it is important to note that the novel trilogy gives some parallels to what goes on in the games, Afton information included. This is how we found out that Afton's name is William Afton, because in FNAF 4 he was still nameless. We find out he was the founder and owner of Fazbear Entertainment / Freddy's along with Henry Emily. We find out more of what Afton's responsibilities were when he was the head of the establishments. We find out more about him, which ends up linking to the games. We get to Sister Location, which a lot more about Afton is revealed in this game. First off, we get confirmation that the killer's given name from the Silver Ice novel, William Afton, is in fact also his canonical name in the game timeline, proven by the opening cutscene of the game. As heard in the same cutscene, he's even given his own voice, being played by PJ Haywood respectively, giving him more of a British accent. We also find out Afton created his own animatronics, which were the Funtime animatronics, and founded his own robotics company, Afton Robotics LLC. We also find out he has a daughter along with his two sons, that being Elizabeth Afton. Elizabeth gets scooped and dies. Circus Baby is shown in the ice cream minigame within Sister Location. The events of the game follow Michael Afton, William's oldest son, where he's sent by William for whatever reason. In this game, we pretty much get more hints and clues to what Afton's true motivation is, or what he's truly up to within the series. We pretty much find out through secret blueprints that the Funtime animatronics were made to kill children, as shown by some of their quote-unquote features. Why? Well, it ties into a certain thing Afton is revealed to be doing in the game timeline, that being experimenting with Remnant. Remnant plays a huge part in the paranormal activities that go on with the animatronics throughout the series, minus the spirits themselves. It is implied that Afton would get the Funtime animatronics to kill these children so he could experiment with Remnant. The reason why he's experimenting with Remnant, however, that plays into a possible theory for what his motivation is throughout the series. One thing about the FNAF series and William Afton himself is that his true motivation for his crimes throughout the series have never been truly revealed. It has always been a debate, a mystery, and a subject of discussion and theorizing for many years. One theory that tends to be popular with many people is the loss of a family member to William, whether it be the Crying Child, Elizabeth, or even Miss Afton, which has actually been theorized about. Said loss made Afton want to get Fazbear Entertainment shut down, which has led to his various murders and crimes in relation to the brand. Another possible theory, and what is usually considered the most plausible one by most fans, fans is that Afton seeks immortality. The murders and crimes he commits are all possibly correlated to him experimenting with remnants so that technically he could live on forever. This has also led to a plausible theory that Afton never truly cared for his children and saw them as ways to go forth with his seek in immortality and remnant. Possibly the reason why Michael was sent down the Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals in the first place. Hell, it's even theorized that the cartoon you get to watch in between nights of the game, The Immortal and the Restless, is meant to represent William and Michael's relationship, a father neglecting his son. Hell, to get ahead of myself a little bit, it's revealed in Pizzeria Simulator through one of the blueprints that the purpose of the scooper and sister location is to transfer remnant. Whatever Afton's true motivation is for what he does, the fact it's a mystery and toss-up honestly makes him such an interesting villain. If you get fans talking about him, I'd say he's interesting. I also want to point out another plausible theory that is usually believed by a lot of fans, that regardless of what his motivation is, it's possible that Afton started to grow sadism over time, basically meaning he started to get genuine enjoyment and thrill out of the murders and crimes he commits, which definitely makes him more of a threatening antagonist. This carries on to Pizzeria Simulator, which to me, just like Sister Location, is another important part of Afton's history. Obviously, we have SpringTrap. SpringTrap has actually been said by Scott Cawthon to have a lore reason behind his design, something that is controversial among FNAF fans to this very day. Another aspect of SpringTrap that is controversial to fans is how he's portrayed, because remember, this is still William Afton himself. This is where Afton's character starts taking somewhat of a turn in the eyes of fans. In FNAF 3, Afton getting springlocked and becoming SpringTrap was seen as a somewhat ironic fate to the villain because he became what he turned his victims into. However, when he's SpringTrap, he seems to enjoy the fate he had. This can coincide with the plausible theory that Afton seeked immortality and he basically succeeded because he's still around, just in a suit. Hell, the line that originates from this game, "I always come back," which has basically become the villain's catchphrase, can be seen as somewhat symbolic of that. SpringTrap, in terms of what he means for Afton's character, is simply a debatable subject among fans, point blank. All in all though, Pizzeria Simulator actually pretty much serves as the villain's end. Along with the other souls in the building, Afton goes away too, and he's pretty much sentenced down to the depths of hell for his crimes. This ending is beloved by several fans, and it's not hard to see why. Then of course there's Ultimate Custom Night, which pretty much serves as an epilogue to the end of his story. He pretty much gets tortured in hell by Golden Freddy, or the one you should not have killed, or whoever you think it is. Mostly because that is also a debate among FNAF fans. Hell, back to the book, specifically Fazbear's Fright, there's the third story from Bunny Call, known as The Man in Room 1280. This story can pretty much serve as a parallel to what possibly happened to Afton, where he actually survived the Pizzeria Simulator fire and he's taken to the hospital. He is tormented by the spirit Andrew, and there's a decent bit in terms of what happens with Afton and Fazbear Frights. It's obviously debated on if Fazbear Frights is canon to the games, but some parallels can be made, such as Afton possibly being the one you should not have killed. So pretty much Pizzeria Simulator / Ultimate Custom Night could still be the end of Afton's story. Of course, there's the Steel era of games like the Help Wanteds and Security Breach. They have an all-new antagonist known as the Mimic who's trying to copy Afton in his crimes. While the Mimic is definitely not Afton himself, he still lives on for the Mimic's motivations and goals, so I guess you could still say he always comes back. William Afton in the FNAF games is a character that a lot of people talk about all the time. He's a major suspect in FNAF theorizing and speculation. He's also the talk of opinion discussion a lot of the time. A lot of people think he was a fantastic villain, where a lot of people think he fell off somewhere around Sister Location or even Pizzeria Simulator, the latter thinking the way they do because of the argument he became too complex of a villain. To be fair, he used to be just a mysterious killer, which definitely has its intrigue behind it. However, a lot of people like myself would argue that giving Afton more of an identity and fleshing him out more made him more of an interesting character because we started being given possible leads to his overall goals and motivations. We get to learn more about how truly evil he is. Regardless of what you think of him though, William Afton in the official FNAF games is the most memorable version of the character because he's the original and he has a lot of story and history to him. So essentially, this version of Afton is probably the second most known interpretation of him. William Afton in the FNAF movie series is portrayed by American actor Matthew Lillard. Matthew Lillard has starred in various films such as Stu Macher in Scream, Shaggy in the live-action Scooby-Doo films, and more. A lot of people regard Lillard's performance as Afton to such a high regard because of how well he plays the villain. His performance is usually seen as a highlight of the film to many people who saw it, not even just FNAF fans. What is the deal with Afton in the FNAF movies? What are the similarities and differences between the film interpretation and game interpretation? Well, let's see by detailing what there is to his film appearance. In the movie series, William Afton pretty much commits the same crime he is known for in the FNAF games, that being murdering 5 children at Freddy's by dressing up as Spring Bonnie to get their trust and luring them into a back room. Another crime he commits in the movie that's similar to the games is murdering a 6th child. However, in the movie, there are differences. In it, he kidnaps Mike's brother Garrett in a black sedan without a license plate and kills him off screen. This of course is the main aspect of the plot of the movie and is what puts it all together, as Mike becomes haunted by this throughout the film. This would also somewhat go into play with how Afton recognizes Mike's surname through Garrett when he is interacting with him at the beginning of the movie. William would also have a daughter just like in the games, although instead of it being Elizabeth, it would be Vanessa. Yep. Now, there are obviously theories that Vanessa in the games and Elizabeth are one and the same, but we don't have to think about that right now. It is also vital to note that Mike and William are not son and father in this movie's canon, which is unlike the games. Completely different canons or different relation. I must acknowledge though that there are theories saying that they could be father and son, but it's not confirmed as of writing the script for this video. One thing that movie Afton takes from not the games, but the novel trilogy is the fact he uses a fake alias to remain hidden from the public. Fake name, fake personality, everything like that. In the movie, the fake name would be Steve Raglan and he would be a career consultant. His career as a career consultant is how you would get Mike to go to Freddy's and his plan can be conducted. Afton also pretty much serves as the phone guy in the movie by telling Mike what he needs to do on his first night over the phone. Interesting choice, I'll say. After that though, Afton pretty much disappears for the rest of the film until the fifth night, which is also the film's climax. He shows up in the spring Bonnie suit, or as it's only referred to in the film as the Yellow Rabbit. He also does something that is in reference to the original Scream film, where he wipes the blade on his knife with his hand in a certain way. It's an obvious nod to how Matthew Lillard portrays both Afton and Stu Macher, one of the original ghost faces. Always thought that was a cool reference, and I'm sure many horror fans adored that. With this part of the film, we pretty much have confirmation that Afton can pretty much control the animatronics in a way where the spirits inside them don't remember who their murderer was. Of course, being Afton himself, we also discovered this is possible for the drawings hung up on the walls of Freddy's. When Mike and Abby realize this, they take full advantage of it, and Abby draws a picture of the Yellow Rabbit, or well, Afton killing the spirits. This in turn gets the animatronics to get spring-locked and taken down, which serves as the villain's defeat in the movie. This of course is a parallel to the novel trilogy again, which will be discussed further in the section where I talk about that interpretation of Afton. With this amount of control he has over the animatronics, he's able to make them do whatever he wants, which involves killing people. In terms of the motivations Afton has in the film for his plans of killing Abby and having her become an animatronic as well as why he killed Garrett, they're pretty much unknown currently. It is widely believed by many that these motivations will be revealed eventually in the film's sequels, so it's best to wait for those films to come out before we can confidently determine why he's doing what he's doing. In the meantime though, we can pretty much talk about his character in this film. Afton in the movie seems to be more of a scheming type in comparison in the games. He seems to be more clever and articulate with how he carries out his plan in the film. He can even be seen as manipulative with how he interacts with certain characters. This is definitely more of a realistic portrayal of Afton in comparison to his game counterpart. In the games, he seemingly does what he does for whatever reason, and that is it. In the movie, he thinks about the long run and thinks ahead when it comes to what he decides to do next. A lot of people seem to really like this portrayal of Afton, and it fits his character, I'd say. Afton also seems to have a big head in the movie, as in he's full of himself. That is what I say is his biggest overall flaw. Not in a negative critique way, hell no. More so a personality flaw specifically. The thing that pretty much gets him in the fate he ends up having. It can be first related to when he's talking to Mike over the phone about how the original owner of Freddy's is a sentimental guy, obviously referring to himself. He shows clear high regard for his work related to Freddy's. He even changes his whole tone and personality to be more excited and charismatic instead of dull and collective when Freddy's is brought up during his interaction with Mike at his office. This of course even plays later into when he gets spring-locked with how he thinks he's gonna get away with what he's doing and that he'll become just like one of the animatronics, a spirit possessed in a suit, basically being able to stick around and carry out more of whatever he's got planned. He knows or at least thinks he'll be back. That's why he says his catchphrase, "I always come back," when he gets spring-locked. Even during his death, he's still cocky and egotistical. It's a very nice character flaw Afton has that makes him very unique in the films. I will also say that even though he's a scheming man with a big head, he isn't afraid to let his cruel side out, as shown by him trying to kill his own daughter Vanessa during the fifth night, proving pretty much how uncaring he is under circumstances. The best part about this is that some of these details can be tied to his game counterpart, where when he's scrap-trapped, he realizes he pretty much has immortality and has a big head over it. Same with how him being uncaring to his daughter can tie to the popular theory from the games that Afton didn't care about his children and just saw them as opportunities for experimentation. This pretty much leads to the conclusion of this section discussing the movie Afton. William in the film series has many similarities and differences to his game interpretation, and I think there are enough to make Afton in the movies a memorable and unique villain that stands out. Hell, he even has parallels to how he's portrayed in the novel trilogy, like the fake alias and the controlling animatronics with drawings detail, which is all really cool. As well, that's just honestly a really good thing that the movie did in my opinion. Reason being is so that more FNAF fans who aren't really familiar with the books can get pretty much a dose of what there is to them, and also just serves as nice references and parallels for the FNAF fans who are familiar with the books. At the end of the day, while the FNAF movie isn't perfect and has its issues, some that are kinda huge, it did get a decent amount of things right in my opinion, and one of those things was how they portrayed William Afton. Now, his screen time in the film is probably worth critique and is probably the only real and huge downside to him in the movie. However, in terms of what Afton's overall character is, the movie did an awesome job, point blank. William Afton in the FNAF novel trilogy is another very interesting interpretation of the character. The novel trilogy, by the way, being the Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, and the Fourth Closet. Let me just start off by saying that these books were how William Afton's name was first revealed ever in the franchise. Up until the release of the Silver Eyes, nobody knew what Afton's name was. Sister Location would then confirm that this name of his is true even in the game's universe. Already, that makes this version of him identifiable even back then. In terms of the character himself, well, let's get into that. So essentially, just like the games and movies, Afton pretty much is guilty for the same crimes of the murders. However, some of his victims this time round are differently named characters. That being because the novel trilogy is another separate canon from both the game canon and the movie canon. However, Scott has stated these books, as well as the other FNAF book series like Fazbear's Fright and Tales from the Pizzaplex, can be used to give hints towards lore points in the games to give some type of direction. This is best used for Afton in the novels when the topic of Afton's relation to Freddy's is brought up. Afton being a co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment along with Henry Emily. Anyway, Afton is still his murderous self regardless. In the Silver Eyes, he uses a fake alias and identity to hide his past from the public and to fit in, that being his role as a Freddy security guard named Dave Miller, not to be confused with a fan-made interpretation of the character who we'll be discussing very soon in this video. Anyway, he uses this alias to pretty much gain the trust of Charlie and her friends. However, Afton does get found out by the end. Afton pretty much serves as a looming antagonist throughout the novel. He ends up wearing the Spring Bonnie suit and pretty much exclaims to Charlie and friends that he's one of them being the animatronics. Similar to the movie, Afton can basically control the animatronics and he pretty much has them go after adults, perceiving them as intruders, hence why he goes after and corners Charlie and her friends. However, they are saved by Golden Freddy, which in the novel trilogy universe is possessed by Michael, and no, not Michael Afton. Michael Brooks was a friend of Charlie's who was murdered by Afton 10 years prior to the story's events, and then Afton gets spring-locked thanks to Charlie and he gets dragged away by the animatronics, again pretty similar to the movie. Continuing on with the Twisted Ones, Afton created the Twisted Animatronics. This counterpart of animatronics is linked to illusion discs. How this is all possible is that these devices play audio at a high enough frequencies to disorient you and force hallucinations within the brain. Using this, the Twisted Animatronics have victims get tricked and lured by a fake and more friendlier perception of whatever animatronic. Then they basically get killed. These illusion discs are also used in the underground pizzeria to change how the place looks. It is also established with these illusion discs that Afton Robotics LLC exists in the novel trilogy universe when Charlie and John take a piece off from Twisted Foxy that states such. Afton also pretty much feels like he has so much power when he's in control of the Twisted Animatronics. As well in this novel, Afton comes back as SpringTrap, he even calls himself such. After that, he pretty much disappears. Finally, in the Fourth Closet, Afton somehow gets himself out of the Spring Bonnie suit and he looks, well, hideous, to say the least. He also creates the Funtime animatronics in this novel, similar to the games. It is also revealed that Elizabeth Afton exists in this canon, and let's just say, Afton did not treat her well at all, downright abused her. Elizabeth also serves to be the identity of Circus Baby as well. This is of course related to the big reveal that there were multiple Charlies made for certain ages of Charlie, and that the real Charlie died extremely young. In the Fourth Closet, he is portrayed as miserable and constantly in pain, probably due to his life after getting out of the Spring Bonnie suit. As well in this novel, his search for immortality and his experimentation on Remnant is borrowed from the games. He has that motivation here too. It's pretty much linked with his overall fear of death. This fear of his comes full circle at the end where he finally gets killed after Cartland does something similar to what Abby does in the FNAF movie. He draws a picture showcasing the true nature of Afton, making him lose control of the animatronics he had, and Funtime Freddy and Funtime Foxy go in for the kill, that being the villain's end in the novel trilogy. William Afton in the novel trilogy is pretty intriguing, mostly because he's given a lot to his overall character. In these books, he's pretty much vindictive and a selfish man. He shows a lack of care for anyone else. Hell, he values his work more than people, even his loved ones. Whether it be shown for his manipulation he has when it comes to him controlling animatronics, his abuse towards his only daughter Elizabeth, his attempts to justify his crimes, the jealousy he has towards Henry, etc, etc. In terms of his official interpretations in the franchise, this is certainly his most villainous form in a direct way. This man is not a joke. He's a genuine and crazy threat. Also, just like it's theorized in the games, it's pretty much directly implied that he has grown sadism in the novels. Yet again, he pretty much gets enjoyment from his murders, and that could be a motivator in why he commits them. This of course shows the pure insanity this man has. He also has a very warped perception on how he views the spirits being inside the animatronics. Even though the spirits are suffering when they're possessing them, he considers them to be quote-unquote family and all of that, which is certainly very crazy. He also even has a cowardly side to him. This basically shows when he tries to clear any witnesses from his crimes. This pretty much shows that even though he's a pretty fucked up and evil man, he has his own flaws that slow him down from what he wants to do. William Afton's portrayal in the novel trilogy is a pretty insane and indirect one. However, it's also a really good one. He's an interesting character to read about in these books, and he remains a pretty damn good villain. Genuinely impressed. We now carry on to the first fan-made interpretation of William Afton in this video, and we also carry on to what is arguably the most well-known and heavily regarded as the best fan-made interpretation of Afton. Dave Miller from the Dayshift of Freddy's Trilogy by DirectDoggo. Dave is certainly a very interesting version of the character, that is for absolute sure. Throughout the Dayshift games, we find out more and more in regards to who Dave is, backstory and lore-wise, personality-wise, and etc. For starters, we're thrown into the first Dayshift game where admittedly this is when he's at his most comedic. You will learn right away that half of Dave's character is pretty comical and full of hilarity. He's meant to be seen as pretty goofy and silly, all things considered, whether that be his text-to-speech voice as the wise guy on VoiceForge, which sounds pretty fucking hilarious I may add, his overusage of calling you the player, aka Jack Kennedy, old sport, his dialogue being very pesky in a way, all the like. A lot of this is a huge contrast to William Afton from the official interpretations of the character, where he's often seen as more serious. In Dayshift 1, you can meet up with him inside the safe room of the Freddy Fazbender's location in Colorado that you work at during the duration of the game. Then he'll ask Jack whether or not he wants to assist Dave in luring 5 children to the safe room to be murdered by them. Also, the pizzeria can shut down. Already, this is mirroring Afton's crimes from official FNAF media, luring 5 children with a mascot costume to the location's safe room and then murdering the children there. That will not be the only parallel to Afton that Dave has. During this first interaction between Jack and Dave, Dave also tells us he did the same crime of murdering 5 children via luring back at a Freddy's location in Utah, which resulted in a quick closure of that location. This is of course heavily implied to be the same exact incident from the official FNAF media. If you commit to the evil route in Dayshift 1, you can pretty much help Dave by accomplishing tasks that would ensure you and him don't get caught. It leads to the final day, where it's revealed that Dave has some pretty good knowledge on working on the animatronics and be a technician for them, which is another parallel to Afton in official media. Pretty much Dave works on Fredbear and turns them into Breadbear, and or Dave works on Farford and make him stronger, leading to either both of them or one of them attacking the pizzeria on the final day, depending on the ending of course. Both of them attacking will result in Jack and Dave being successful in escaping the pizzeria and heading off to Las Vegas, Nevada as a personal celebration for getting away with what they did at Freddy's. Oh yeah, Dave also likes Vegas and strippers, like, a lot. We also find out in this first game that Dave is responsible for an incident where an employee snagged Foxy at a Freddy's location in Arizona during open hours and threw him into the Grand Canyon, said employee being Dave Miller himself. In the first Dayshift of Freddy's game, Dave Miller is pretty much meant to serve as a parody of William Afton. Dave retains some aspects of the original William Afton character, such as the name Dave Miller literally being the name of his fake alias in the FNAF novel trilogy, the fact he murders 5 children via luring them to the safe room of the mascot costume, having knowledge on the intricacies of animatronics and pretty much knowing how to work on them, and more. We even get possible motivations for his actions in this game, which at this point seem to be that he wants Freddy shut down. The reason he wants Freddy shut down seemingly being because of how the company won't let workers leave, which we'll later find out more. It all lies within the fact that he, Jack, Peter, Steven, and other employees were signers of the Red Contract. The Red Contract being a contract new employees of Freddy's have to sign, which makes them have to work there forever unless they get fired or they die. Spoiler alert, sorta. There's way more to the motivations of Dave's crimes throughout the trilogy, but that will not be discussed until later. But back on topic, despite these parallels and this somewhat of a setup towards lore for the character, he is very comedic and silly all throughout, enough to where it leans on parody. In my personal opinion, this works well in this game. However, the character of Dave admittedly gets better when he's fleshed out as an actual character with the next 2 games in the series. In Dayshift of Freddy's 2, we find out much more about Dave. Not only do we find out much more about him, he's given more to his identity in the games. Like for starters, he's given his own theme/anthem, which is iconic. It's iconic enough that people who haven't even played these games know this theme and know that it's Dave's. It jives really well with the silly and comedic aspects of Dave's character. One thing we do find out about Dave in this game that does serve lore importance is that Dave Miller is yet again, just like in the FNAF novel trilogy, a fake name and alias, and his real name of course yet again being William Afton. This is an expected twist to find out in the trilogy, but it's still a piece of lore to Dave that is pretty cool and interesting. We see how Dave swears his real name to secrecy when the real Fredbear calls him Afton during the Happiest Day ending route. It also just goes to show how similar Dave is to the official interpretations of Afton. Something I also want to touch on is how with the Dayshift at Freddy's trilogy, since it's a choose your own adventure make a choice type of game, we can pretty much see and explore different sides to Dave. One of the aspects I love about his true character that we see from this is one where you can actually get creeped out and weirded out by Jack. That is if you go through the end ending where you pretty much act obsessive towards Dave, choosing purple text options, continuing from the gnarly ending, and etc. Dave actually gets weirded out by you, and I think it's pretty damn intriguing that a child murderer can feel that way towards someone they believe is worse than him. It adds nuance in the character and shows that they aren't a one-dimensional bad guy. Speaking of being a bad guy, the other aspect I love about Dave's character we get to see is that in comparison to the official interpretations of Afton, Dave is a much more cunning antagonist. He tends to have way more plans and methods to get what he wants. He pretty much schemes. The FNAF movie version of Afton could also be seen as cunning, but I'd argue that personality trait is way more apparent and amped up in Dave. It even serves as a running joke within the game, that being Dave's handy-dandy 3-step plan. It's nice. I think being cunning and a schemer is something that definitely works for any interpretation of Afton. It's a unique approach to the character and I love it. Also in Dayshift 2, we find out about a character named Henry Miller, who is this trilogy's version of Henry, and just like in the official version of Afton, he's important to Dave's story and character. This takes us to Dayshift 3, where we learn so much and get so much about Dave. For starters, something this game in particular did that was very clever. Dalko made it so that there would be two versions of Afton. Davetrap, who's meant to be the feral and evil side of Dave, and then the flip side version of Dave, who's meant to be nicer, more collective version of the character. Therefore, we can actually be sympathetic towards Dave and find out more about his past. For starters, Davetrap is more of the same for Dave, but in a really good way. One aspect I love about Davetrap is that we find out he's pretty obsessive and a cleaning man, especially towards Jack. This is most shown in End, where we get to see Jack blow up on Dave. Dave is so obsessed by Jack that it's actually disturbing and creepy. However, this is a really good thing for the character. As we'll get into a certain interpretations of Afton in the video, some of them tried to heavily amp up how evil Afton is in a rather crazy and rancid ways. In my eyes, Dave's obsessive side towards Jack is how he amp up Afton to be more disturbing in a good way. You try to have it be a character trait that would make sense in-universe for Afton. Yes, it's a little silly maybe, but it's a way more fitting trait for the character than certain other, traits for later interpretations. We also get to pretty much see how disturbing Dave is in the later training kit tapes you hear before Dayshifts in the game that, yes, Dave recorded. As well, something to point out is that Dave and Jack's relationship really depends on which ending you go for in any of these games, which is really neat. Hell, another disturbing thing about Dave that's revealed in this game is that he keeps the souvenirs of his victims in this game's version of the FNAF 4 box. Dee's scarf being one of them. It's such a good twist on the FNAF 4 box mystery in my perspective. Also, we get to see that Dave has an underground bunker in this game like Afton does in the official games. The bunker even being a sister location in S Bunker, another parallel. As well, despite being a comedic and silly version of Afton sometimes, we can have his cruel and truly despicable moments just like the original character. This is something that is especially seen in Dayshift 2 and 3. Now we pretty much get into the flip side of Dave, which is how we find out about Dave's true backstory. Dave's backstory is such a sad and messed up one. It also shows that the villain pretty much came to be and what made him snap. Essentially, Dave, being born as William Afton and born purple, was abandoned by his parents and he was casted into an orphanage. However, nobody would adopt him due to his purple appearance. He would reside in New York and then he would end up meeting a man named Henry Miller. He was the host of a traveling circus. They would open up Fredbears together and then they would both pretty much lure and kill children so no competition could overtake them. Dave and Henry would have a similar dynamic to their official counterparts in the games, and at least in the business side of things, not murder. However, Dave would die, and Fredbears would be bought out by Fazbender Entertainment. They would even steal Fredbear. And Dave did not like this, and at that point going forward, Dave's motivation would be to get every restaurant under the ownership of the company shut down, usually being due to what him and Henry would always do, luring and murdering children. Dave would go by Dave Miller. He would take this name from Henry's late son, David Miller. Of course, though, it would be slowly apparent to everyone else, and eventually Dave himself, that Henry was worse than him and that he ruined Dave's life. Dave would still be in somewhat denial. That is until the good ending of Dayshift 3, where he finally realizes how truly despicable Henry is, and he pretty much redeems himself by fighting alongside the others against Henry. This is all very amazing and intriguing lore for the character. This pretty much proves that fan-made interpretations of William Afton could be just as interesting as the official/original. There is a decent amount of development with the character and the backstory details, and his motivations make him a much more complex villain and character. Dayshift 3 gave a lot of identity to many of the series' characters, and Dave was one of them. Because of Dayshift 3, Dave is truly one of the best interpretations of William Afton ever. Before I conclude this section, here are some fun aspects about Dave that were apparently said by Doggo on Tumblr. Apparently, Dave is pansexual. Explains a lot. As well, his favorite movie is apparently The Great Gatsby, which would pretty much explain the old sport catchphrase he has. Also, he doesn't know his own birthday besides the year, which is 1945. He likes to think it's Halloween, though. Additionally, he's 6'4" tall. However, when his neck is stretched, he is 6'6" tall, and yes, he can stretch his neck. He can also pretty much play the trombone. And finally, he apparently replaced himself on the animatronic criminal databases with Elvis Presley. Pretty neat piece of trivia. All in all, Dave Miller from the Dayshift at Freddy's trilogy is one of the better fan-made interpretations of Afton. He's probably the most iconic and popular fan-made interpretation too. He's featured in a lot of memes, his theme is iconic, hell, him and Jack are even referenced in Chapter 1 of Indigo Park.
Jackson, you hear about the new mascots?
Yeah, think it'll put us out of a job?
I think so. Old, sport, and right after we got this damn raccoon costume.
Man, screw this place. I said we get our asses out of here and go straight to Vegas.
Honestly though, it's so deserved. Dave is a very complex and interesting character. He has very comedic and silly bits, but he's got this very cool lore and his various parts of his personality that depend on which ending you go for in the games. Whether it be cunning, cleany, creeped out, or hell, even downright sympathetic. Dave Miller is fantastic. What else can I really say, old sports? Oh boy, this interpretation of Afton. Before I begin, I must explain that I'm only going to be discussing the original version of Garvey from the original version of Dormitabis. No versions from any remakes, even the one by Expelled. As personally, I believe that is all that is necessary to discuss in this video. Anyway, Garvey Wright. His name in this game being that because Dormitabis' story only exists in a timeline where FNAF 1 through 4 are canon. That of course being before the reveal of William Afton's name. He also records the tapes that could be found and heard in this game. In terms of the character's appearance, he did actually have purple skin and it was a birth defect. He also apparently has a pointy nose thanks to how his corpse skull looks like in the Springlock suit. However, the purple skin due to his birth defect is pretty much an important motivation for his crimes throughout this game. So essentially his younger brother and his friends would all make fun of him for his purple skin. This would lead to Garvey becoming insane and wanting to murder anybody, especially children, who made fun of his birth defect. This is due to him being a sensitive person. This of course led him to a path of crime. He would end up becoming someone who is selfish, unapologetic, careless, and someone who holds grudges, often leading to him wanting revenge a lot of the time. Just like Afton from official media, he murders 5 children and stuffs them in the animatronics, and he also apparently murders 5 more children. He also kills another child and throws them into the dumpster outside Cake Bears. Apparently, another motivation he has is to get Freddy shut down. He would also trap Fritz Smith in a suit and let him die in it. He would also assault John as SpringTrap. A lot of his crimes can be seen in the Cardboard Theater minigame. However, that is not all there is to this man. You see, well, Garvey Wright might as well be the worst interpretation of William Afton there is. That being because of one crime in particular I haven't mentioned until now. Essentially, Garvey rapes a young girl named Maria, who would go on to possess Chica in this game's story. This is obviously controversial because this is way worse than how Afton is portrayed in official media, as he didn't do anything that notorious. However, in this game, he's cranked up to a goddamn 100. However, this just doesn't do it for me and a lot of others because it's such in poor taste. It doesn't come across as respectful and just comes across as edgy for the sake of it. Pretty much there's no point to it. That is what really stinks about Garvey Wright. He had potential because admittedly, the purple skin birth defect resulting in harsh bullying and mockery is a decent concept for the character. However, that is what the developer did with him and it really ruins it. That is why personally, this is one of, if not the worst versions of Afton that exist, including both official and fan-made works. So, SpringTrap from FNAF 3 the Musical by Luhigini, also going by POPGOES or Rape Trap. Yeah, I'm just gonna play the clip.
This attraction is great, so many guys I can rape.
That is what this interpretation of Afton is known for. He is known for that line and that line only. He wants to quote-unquote rape the security guard of FNAF 3. He even says some other very weird lines in this musical such as, which I'd argue is the worst because it provides some extreme uncomfortability to the song, which is a contrast to what the tone of the song is going for, comedic. Yes, this is meant to be more of a parody and a comedic take on Afton, going over the top and exaggerating him. When I mentioned how Dave Miller was a good example of how to raise the bar for Afton character-wise, this is not an example on how to do that. Just like Garvey Wright, this approach for the character makes no sense and merely exists for shock value. There is nothing meaningful to be said about this interpretation. Both him and Garvey are meant to be purely shock value, especially this one because of the comedic angle, which led people to ironically enjoying this interpretation, which is fair enough. This dude is memed everywhere online and is one of the FNAF community's biggest jokes, so at least he had some type of impact. In terms of what else there really is to say about the character, everything else about him pretty much mirrors SpringTrap / Afton. His face is SpringTrap looks like Bonnie's, he's the purple guy / Afton inside SpringTrap, he kills people, etc. There is also the popular FNAF theory on how Michael Afton could be the Frights Guard. This song's lyrics are sung by SpringTrap, Michael's father, is so much worse and messed up. And finally, this version of Afton has appeared in 2 other musicals by Luhigany. Pizzeria Simulator the musical, where he pretty much does nothing in, and then FNAF Movie the musical, where he makes a reference to the meme. Although it is better in the FNAF Movie musical because he comes up with a clever way of not saying the word rape, going for a word that rhymes with it instead. Great. All in all, another of the worst William Afton interpretations exists. He's a bad one, but he can be enjoyed ironically at the very end of the day. This is an intriguing version of Afton. Pretty much a lot of what happens with this interpretation of Afton mirrors how he's portrayed in official media, at least when it comes to his crimes and his overall story. However, this version of Afton is notably way more chaotic. I think this is an interesting take when it comes to Afton. Afton is usually a character that isn't seen as chaotic, but I think it works for this series and the character. It almost comes across as parody, similar to Dayshift Dave, and I think it's a neat spin for him. He's also very interested in the character Spring Bonnie, which somewhat mirrors the actual Afton to an extent. He can also be pretty lazy, and he also has a huge ego. He's so full of himself, which is a character trait of official interpretations of Afton that isn't really focused on too heavily. I genuinely like that a decent amount. He also can have his moments of being pretty villainous. He has sadism, and he's also pretty resentful and can hold on to grudges, no matter what it's about. I like how even in this more light version of Afton, he still has dark aspects to him that makes him a good villain in the series. He's still very deranged, and it's appreciated that he still follows the official character pretty closely. Something really interesting about this take of Afton in particular is that he does seem appreciative of things he had before he lost them for good. This makes this version of Afton a somewhat tragic villain, and that's pretty genius. He is all around a very well written and clever character, and it brings some intrigue to this series. All around, this is another version of William Afton that is pretty cool and interesting. Love him a lot. One of the best interpretations of the character, genuinely. This interpretation of William Afton is genuinely pretty interesting. So his story is pretty much based around him trying to bring Elizabeth, his daughter, back after an accident. This of course being tied to Elizabeth dying to Circus Baby and Sister Location. The quote-unquote Remnant trials would take place and would pretty much mirror what Afton does with Remnant throughout the series. All of this would lead to Afton growing an obsession for trying to bring his daughter back. He would also have an obsession with laughing maniacally. Afton would even go as far as to kill his wife to use for Remnant with Ballora. Afton would then end up becoming SpringTrap for the same exact way he did in FNAF 3. Afton would then pretty much get captured by GEMS and taken to their headquarters for an interview. He would be interviewed and he would be asked about the MCI, his biggest crime. The thing with Afton in this series though is that he's proud of what he's done. He's rather pleased by his accomplishments. Due to this, he fesses up to it and goes about talking about it in a very vindictive but proud way. He even goes as far as to try and kill the interviewer. Afton would end up escaping the facility though. However, he would be brought back. He would then be tortured by Cassidy in the FNAF 4 house. That is a summary of Afton's story and the interviewed, essentially. The biggest piece of intrigue in regards to Afton's character in this series is how psychotic he is. He is straight up depraved. I really like that about him in this series. He serves to be more crazy than his official interpretations, especially with his utter pride for his horrible crimes when he's interviewed at the headquarters. He also grows obsessions in such a dangerous way that it makes him a very compelling villain. He even has a delightfully villainous voice to go along with him. This version of Afton is the pure definition of quote-unquote vindictive. The Interviewed is a really good fan series of videos on YouTube, and their portrayal of Afton is certainly one of the best parts about the series. I recommend giving this series a watch for Afton alone. It's pretty damn good, and the interpretation of Afton is one of the best fan-made interpretations. Oh boy, we got another interesting one, mostly in that he comes from a very controversial fan game series. Vincent from the Return the Freddy's, his name being based off an actual fan name for Afton around the early days of Five Nights at Freddy's before his actual name was revealed. Despite the controversial nature of the fan game series, Vincent doesn't really do a lot in this series. He's a child murderer in this series and has murdered children. He's also the phone guy of the first game, which is also pretty interesting, being based on the theory from the early days of the franchise that phone guy and Afton were one and the same. He also appears throughout the minigames of the series, even having his own minigame sprites. He also uses Fritz Smith as a fake name, which was another theory from the early days of the franchise, but wasn't as popular. That being Afton and Fritz Smith being the same person. In terms of more interesting stuff about him that pertains to the Return to Freddy's, he uses and wears a golden Freddy suit to kill Michael in Night 6 of the first game. There's also the lore about him that was going to be in the cancelled Return to Freddy's 5, but is no longer considered canon. He also has alternate lore to him in The Dreadful Truth, where he didn't actually kill children, and he killed BFP on accident. Yeah, there isn't a lot to Vincent in The Return to Freddy's, which isn't a surprise, because despite the series' glaring issues, The Return to Freddy's is such a nothing series. I'm sorry. I wish there was more to Vincent, because he had potential. Just was all wasted, honestly. Yet another William Afton interpretation that isn't very good nor intriguing. Unfortunate, isn't it? For this one, I'm gonna have somebody else come on the video and discuss this one. I want to bring on JoeyDoesStuff, also known as Vivian, who's a longtime viewer of my channel, and even made a video discussing the series this interpretation is from. Take it away, Vivian.
Hello everyone, my name is JoeyDoesStuff/Vivian, and you might know me as the guy who made a kinda long video about SpringTrap and Mangle. Tyler has asked me if I could talk about this version of SpringTrap and Afton, or whatever his name is, and I agreed to do so. I'm mainly going to talk about SpringTrap a lot more, cause I don't have that much to say about this version of Purple Guy. He's fine, I just think characters like Movie Afton and J. James Afton are a lot better and have more depth than this guy, aside from his past history with Samantha. However, at least he gets the core of Afton's character, that being not that sympathetic. Sure, he feels bad for killing Samantha's daughter, Jennifer, but that lunatic killed her by shooting her in the stomach and cutting off both of her arms. I don't think that's even an accident, he's just a psychopath. And the scene where he just laughs after Samantha kills her is quite disturbing. Still better than these pieces of shit. Now about SpringTrap himself, he is a sentient animatronic that likes to smoke, hates Mangle's obsessive crush on him, and struggles with the ghost of Purple Guy controlling him every time it hits 12 AM. What I really like about SpringTrap in this show is that despite his attitude at times, he is genuinely a good person. While he does hate Mangle behaving like an obsessive fan every time he shows up, he doesn't actually hate her as a person. Not only he sympathizes with Mangle losing Jennifer, as she was their #1 fan back then, but after Purple Guy possesses SpringTrap and almost kills Mangle, he manages to go back to his normal self and feels bad at what Purple Guy did to them. And there's also the remastered version of Season 2 Episode 7. We learned that he and Fredbear used to work together back in Fredbear's family diner before they got separated after a certain incident. But decades later, Mangle finds out that Fredbear was kept in the basement this whole time, all withered and stuff. They bring him back to the Christmas party upstairs, and SpringTrap is in disbelief when he sees Fredbear for the first time in decades. We even see this amazing scene when we transition back to the past, where we see Spring Bonnie talking about how he's afraid of stepping onto the stage. Fredbear comes close and says to him that everything will be alright, and promises that he will always be with him no matter what. He even goes on to thank Mangle for bringing him back and reuniting with his best friend. Not only the scene is quite emotional to say the least, but it also makes SpringTrap the best character in this series, with his tragic backstory, his struggle with Purple Guy, and his friendship with Mangle. Also, he has a cool as fuck chainsaw around. I go much more in depth in my SpringTrap and Mangle video, especially with other characters that are as good as SpringTrap, but overall, Tomato did a good job writing SpringTrap, and and he's going more into his character in the upcoming Season 2 Episode 12, What They Have Become. I'm gonna thank Tyler for bringing me onto this video. If you wanna check out more of my videos, I have a couple of them you might like. I'm currently making a video about the FNAF SFM shows, and hopefully will come out this year. Now if you excuse me, I will go back to watching whatever this is.
Thanks so much, Vivian. If you guys want to, be sure to watch their video about SpringTrap and Mangle. It's pretty damn good, all things considered. I certainly recommend it. This is another interesting interpretation of William Afton, the one from FNAF VHS by Squimpus McGrimpus. I'm aware of their controversies, but I'm gonna try and separate creator and creation here. That's what I do on this channel. With that being said though, Afton in this has two sons, that being Michael and Joseph. He is also responsible for the MCI, and he would regularly go to the pizzeria from 1984 to 1985, just for the sole purpose of kidnapping and murdering children. He would murder these children just to vent over his loss, that being his son Joseph. This is all thanks to Michael, which pretty much is a mirror to the FNAF 4 bite of 83. William would end up hating his own son Michael, but he would still love Joseph a lot. A lot of his crimes from the FNAF series carry over in this series too. William would end up becoming SpringTrap the same way he does in the games, and once he becomes SpringTrap, he would seek revenge on Michael, mostly due to Michael not saving him when he worked in the night shift at Freddy's in '93. He would also make tapes throughout the story of this series. Eventually, with the help from the puppet, Michael would burn Afton at Fazbear's Fright, ending it once and for all. In terms of William's character in this series, he's notably more heinous and more heartless. He has zero remorse for his victims, and he's much more relentless and crazy when he takes the form of SpringTrap. His deep-rooted hatred for Michael is elevated greatly throughout the analog horror series. It is also shown he is abusive and sociopathic. I really like this interpretation of Afton though. I like how he's pretty much a crazy menace who just has no care for anyone in the world, minus Joseph. He's a genuinely terrible person. There's a lot more to this character than meets the eye when watching the FNAF VHS tapes. It's so fucking cool. All in all, Afton from FNAF VHS is one of the best Afton interpretations there is. A genuinely well-written and enticing one, to say the least. The POPGOES 2016 version of Simon is going to be the one discussed in this video because as of writing the script for this video, POPGOES Evergreen is still not released yet, meaning we don't know a whole lot about the newer version of Simon, just to clarify. If I ever make a sequel to this video and POPGOES Evergreen is out by then, maybe I could discuss his newer version, who knows. Anywho, Simon is one of the more interesting Afton interpretations simply due to how unique he truly is. He has a lot going on with him lore-wise. However, the elephant in the room here, his design. He's so huge and for sure purple, and I think that's neat about him. Makes him more threatening and intimidating. Pretty much though, Simon was artificial intelligence, or AI, that was created by Fritz Glade, the owner of POPGOES Pizzeria. Simon pretty much has an extension where he can evolve as time goes on, so he can be pretty damn similar to what is essentially a real person. He's able to learn things like human speech. He can also manipulate robots that have similar AI to him, and he even manipulates Fritz into giving him access to Weaselware, which is a system that connects and supports the machines and animatronics within the pizzeria. With this connection to Weaselware, he is able to be aware of the environment even though he's blind, which is pretty interesting. He can even change his eye color to emote, which has some significance in the Simon ending of POPGOES 2016. The ending where you have to find Simon on the cameras and press the color button on your desk that corresponds with his eye color. Already, Simon has these interesting details and things going on for him that makes him compelling. The true story of Simon, though, is even more compelling. Pretty much after Fazbear's Fright burns down, there's an auction for the items that survive the fire, similar to the actual ending of FNAF 3. SpringTrap's head was part of this auction, and SpringTrap in this game was possessed by a man named Simon Glade, who's the deceased brother of Fritz Glade. Simon Glade would pretty much be the William Afton of this game's lore. Fritz would buy the SpringTrap head and would attempt to bring his brother back to life. He knew, though, he couldn't bring the head back to life, so he had to make a robotic one, and for the rest of the body, he would use what he learned from his research of the mysterious Purple Man. Simon would be born. Simon would start off having the base AI that Strings, Fritz's other creation, had, but would learn how to evolve. He would have the brain similar to a human, but to a more faster degree. This would result in Fritz being afraid of his creation, mostly that he thought Simon could possibly hurt people. This would end up wanting Fritz to protect himself, which he does by chaining Simon up to a wall before his activation. Simon would activate and start off with the mentality of a toddler, playing around with the game of Simon Says. Ironic. After a while, Simon would grow angry at Fritz for being chained up to his wall for so long that he decides to hatch a plan to escape. He would learn about how Fritz lost his daughter, Bonnie Glade, so he would use that to his advantage. Simon's base plan was to manipulate Fritz into letting him access Weaselware, but he needed the confidence to do so. He would try to manipulate Strange during the nights at the POPGOES pizzeria by having him find Simon 6 times, making him aware of the truth that is at play, and showcasing his power and abilities by turning the POPGOES animatronics into the Lux animatronics. The Lux animatronics would then proceed in destroying the toy animatronics. After all this, Simon would have enough confidence to want to manipulate Fritz and go about his plan. He tries to convince a desperate Fritz he has to connect to Weaselware to save Bonnie, his daughter. Fritz ends up doing it, so then, Simon would then print out the Black Rabbit, who would go on to be possessed by Bonnie herself. Fritz would end up getting killed from this, which unfortunately means that Simon is free. He has Strange shut down via panic attack by showing up to his office. All of this lore coming from POPGOES 2016. Now, Simon's story continues in the canceled POPGOES 2, believe it or not. Simon would destroy the POPGOES animatronics in strings, taking parts from each of them like the heart modules and especially the curiosity module, which came from strings. Simon would attach the curiosity model to his own heart. This would cause a hallucination of himself, stopping his plan, which makes him tear the module out from anger. Simon would reconnect to Weaselware to look into the Purple Man. Then he would end up creating the Epicone animatronics, which entity on POPGOES upon activation attacks Simon. Sorry if I butchered the name of that animatronic type. Losing his left hand and upper jaw, Simon would become Fractured Simon, and that is pretty much all that is known about his story. Simon is quite the villain. I really like how much of a manipulator he is. I also like how he has to build up the confidence to carry out his plan in succession, probably likely due to his age mentality from the start of his activation. He's for sure a different Afton interpretation, and that's why I really like him. He's intriguing to say the least. I also like the connections to Simon Says, a kid's game, very on brand for a FNAF related game. All in all, Simon is one of the better fan-made interpretations of Afton for his enriching lore as well as his awesome design. Simon is just great, simple as. This is going to be the final William Afton interpretation I will be discussing in this video. So Peter, from FNAF The Hidden Lore, which is a series created by Mr. Creepypasta. This version of Afton is the manager of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and just like his official interpretations, caused the MCI. Peter is also voiced by Litterbot. So pretty much the story of Peter is that he initially offers to fix the aftermath of the Bite of 83 to Fred, the owner of Fredbear's Family Diner. Fred agrees to this, and they become business partners, similar to William and Henry. With this, Peter wants to kill children in their establishments with Fred covering it up. Fred covers up the murders Peter does because he initially thinks Peter is doing good by committing these crimes. After the Bite of 87, Peter visits Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and encounters a young girl outside, who tells him about her friends who were stuck in the pizzeria and also how she saw bodies inside the animatronics. To presumably cover up his tracks, Peter takes her inside and kills her, hiding her body along with said friends. Peter later lures a boy named Jonathan while wearing the Golden Freddy suit to a back room where he tortures and kills him. While Peter is killing Jonathan, Fred comes in and interrupts Peter by asking him to stop the murders. Peter agrees to stop but continues the murder he started. After Jonathan is killed, his soul possesses the puppet. In November 1987, Peter kills an animatronic engineer by the name of Victor by locking him in a room with the toy animatronics. This murder would ruin Fred and Peter's relationship with each other, as Fred comes to the conclusion that Peter is just using him as a cover-up and doesn't see any true value in Fred as a person. In 1993, similar to the events of the minigames of FNAF 3, Peter destroys the animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, freeing the trapped souls of the children. The children corner him, so then he enters the spring Bonnie suit to scare them. However, the spring locks fail, which kill him. Fred eventually comes in and seals Peter's body inside the room where he got spring locked and died. In 2023, events similar to the actual gameplay of FNAF 3 occur, where Fazbear Entertainment, looking to create a horror attraction called Fazbear's Frights, the horror attraction, discover Peter at the old Freddy's restaurant in the same exact room he got sealed up in by Fred. They take him in and place him in the attraction. Then, Fred burns down the attraction with Peter still inside. Peter is pretty much a selfish individual, especially in how he uses Fred to carry on his personal crimes. This interpretation of Afton highlights how one could be a bad person to even their closest friends, albeit business partners. The relation between Peter and Fred in this is the strongest aspect of Peter, I feel like. Peter is not the best Afton interpretation, but he is certainly an interesting one with a very interesting character dynamic. The name change is also pretty nice for the character too. All around, Peter is a pretty intriguing antagonist for FNAF The Hidden Lore. In short, William Afton is a very interesting villain, not only because of how he's portrayed in official media, but also because of how he's interpreted by fans in their own works. It was really interesting to see how each of the interpretations differ from each other, especially in what the motivation, backstory, or actual character of them are. Everyone has their own version of Afton in their head, and it's always very cool to see the portrayals. All of this is the main reason why FNAF remains to be a popular franchise on the internet, and why William Afton remains an iconic and memorable villain. So much so that the movie portrayal of the character has been considered to be a new popular movie slasher villain by some people who watch the FNAF movie. Old Willy Boy has his bad interpretations like Garvey, or Return to Freddy's Vincent, or musical SpringTrap, but he has his good interpretations like how he's portrayed in official media, Dave Miller from Dayshift of Freddy's, or J-Gem's Afton. Regardless, Afton will be remembered as a villain known by many people and fans to come. He is the man behind the slaughter. Sorry, I couldn't say that with a straight face. But regardless, William Afton is a unique villain and antagonist, and that is shown time and time again for the various interpretations of the character throughout the years, and will continue to be shown. Maybe I'll make a sequel to this video and talk more about other interpretations of Afton, like the Bluey Capsules version, or the Random Encounters FNAF musical series version. You'll just have to wait and see.